All right, can you hear me? Yes, I'm unmuted. Okay. All right. So we'll give this just another, let's see, what time is it? I guess we get started. So first of all, it's good to see you all from, uh, I've been teaching, as I mentioned to those who were here earlier, I've continued to teach a Bible class on Tuesdays. And so some of the faces that you see may not be familiar because to those of you from Hergic, because they are people in the Bible class, though those of you who have been coming, still coming, will not see any unfamiliar faces, I suspect. What I wanted to do is really something I've been thinking about for quite a while. And that is to think about several biblical women, both from the Torah itself, and actually we'll have examples from the Torah itself, from the prophets, that second section of the Bible, and actually even from the third. And my primary thinking here is to focus a little bit on Esther, since it will be beginning on Thursday night, it'll be Purim. So it's good to think about her. But I want to think more generally about biblical women and the question of their voices. And that really means to think about them not only in terms of what they say, but what they don't say. And to put that in context, Robert Alter, who I think many of you know, who came out with a magnificent translation of the Bible with a commentary, said something I found fascinating, which is that the first time someone speaks in the Bible tells you a lot about them, that it somehow introduces them in a deep way. So that's something to think about as we go through. We're going to look at, well, 4 biblical women, but one of them is a composite, as you'll see what I mean. And we're going to start at the very beginning with Sarah, sort of the first Jewish woman, matriarch. I'm going to share my screen with you. Hopefully this will work. Let's see what happens. And so I'm hoping everybody can see that. Somebody unmute yourself just to tell me you can see it.
You can see it.
Okay, thank you, Marty.
I can see it too.
Okay, thanks, Walter. So what I'll do is I'm going to have some discussion points, and when we come to that part, I will stop sharing the screen so I'll be able to see you if you want to raise your hand, unmute yourself, and contribute something. So we're going to start at the beginning of chapter 12 in the book of Genesis. This is really the first time that God talks to anyone since the flood, and God will speak to Abram. We know a little bit about Abraham, or Abram at this point, from the end of chapter 11, where we're told that a little bit about his family. His wife Sarai is mentioned, and specifically what we're told is that she is barren. That is not the first thing she says, but the first thing we know about her. And as you undoubtedly know, this is really a feature of the matriarchs. So to begin chapter 12 now, the Lord spoke to Abram, "Go forth from your native land, your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I'll bless you. I'll make your name great. You shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse him that curses you. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you." So God commanded him to go, and in verse 4, Abraham went forth as the Lord commanded him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai, his brother's son Lot, and all the wealth that they had amassed, and all the persons that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. And we'll end it there. first passage. So we do hear about Sarai here, about later to be called Sarah, Abraham's wife. What's striking is she doesn't say anything. Now, I want you to put yourself in her place for a moment. Your husband, who's 75 years old, and when what we gather from the biblical narratives, she's not a whole lot younger than him, 75 years old. He says, oh, honey, listen, we're leaving everything behind and going out into the unknown. That's what God told me to do. And she says absolutely nothing. How does she respond? The dutiful wife, she goes. Next passage, a little bit further on, now we're at Genesis chapter 12. Abraham gets to the land that God had promised him, to Canaan, where God is going to bless him and he will multiply. But immediately there's a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife, Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Egyptians see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you're my sister so that it may go well with me because of you, and I may remain alive thanks to you. Again, what does she say? Now, this is not just her husband who has uprooted her and taken her into the unknown, and he's taken her to a place of starvation and famine. And now, as they go down into Egypt, he says to her, listen, you're beautiful, at which point I expect that she is happy to hear that. And then he says, well, look, when the Egyptians see you and they hear that you're my wife, they're going to kill me and let you live. So say you're my sister, right? Now, the truth is that the implication is that she will be taken by the Egyptians. The difference is that he will get to live. And indeed, that's what happens. Once again, she says nothing, absolutely nothing. Later on, she's going to have a servant named Hagar. We'll see that in the next passage, who she will eventually treat rather badly. And one of the things that one wonders is, if Hagar is an Egyptian, one of the things that one wonders is whether her own experience in Egypt, her being passed off as her husband's sister, being taken by the Pharaoh into his palace, whether that will not have some repercussions in terms of how she treats an Egyptian woman. All right, so we're about to hear Sarah speak for the first time. Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. She had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, look, the Lord has kept me from bearing. Consort with my maid, perhaps I shall have a son through her. And Abram heeded Sarai's request. So, first thing that happens now, first time she talks, God has promised Abraham that he'll have lots of children. Not happening. And so she suggests that he take Sarai into his bed, that she will conceive, and it will be her child. Note the emphasis. Perhaps I shall have a son through her. And I want to come back to that in a minute when we discuss this. Okay, the child grew up and was weaned. Abram held a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Sarah saw the son who Hagar the Egyptian, notice the emphasis, had borne to Abraham, playing. Not clear what playing means. The Hebrew is mitzachek. It has a lot of different connotations. Some of them are even sexual. Hard to know what he's doing. But she, that is Sarai, says to Abraham, cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of that slave will not share an inheritance with my son Isaac. And the matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. But God said to Abraham, be not distressed over the boy or your slave. Whatever Sarah tells you, do as she says. It is through Isaac that offspring shall be continued for you. I'm going to stop the share for a minute and go back. And I think I'm going to make sure I can see everybody. Yes, I can. What I want to ask you to think about for a moment now is, what do we learn from Sarah here, and about her concerns, and about when she talks and why she talks? Anyone have anything that they would like to suggest? Yeah, Phyllis. You have to unmute. Phyllis, can you unmute? No. All right, Marilyn, I know you had your hand up.
I think she makes an emphasis on the fact that Hagar is Egyptian. I think that that's bugging her, that her son is half Egyptian.
It could well be, given her experience in Egypt. Any other thoughts about why she speaks when she speaks? She first speaks to tell her husband to take Hagar and to have a son through Hagar, who will be, she says, my son. So that's the first time we hear from her. What are her concerns? Yeah, Phyllis, are you still muted? You're still muted, Phyllis. Unless you can unmute it. You'll see it at the bottom of your screen. Ah, you unmuted. Go ahead.
Jealous.
Yes, go ahead.
You can't hear me.
Yes, we can. Now we can hear you. Phyllis, go ahead. We can hear you. No, you unmuted again. You muted.
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
now you're not muted. Go ahead.
Oh, you unmuted me. Are you there?
Yes.
Are you there? Can
Yes.
You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
You hear me?
Yes, 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 we can hear you.
He felt jealous.
I'm sorry?
Come on.
All right, I'm sorry, this is just not working. Any other thoughts about this? Well, one thing that strikes me. Yeah, go ahead, Barry. No, you're muted again, Barry.
Hear me now.
Unmute.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, you're muted again. Is somebody, Harold, or somebody muting people? Let me see if I can unmute you, Barry. No, I can't. Harold, are you there?
Down the space bar.
Yeah, I unmuted Phyllis.
Yes, push down the space bar and hold it. Try that, Barry. Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I'm holding the space button. She's concerned with the future generations for her husband, because maybe there's some foreshadowing. So she's actually willing to that Abraham have a child through someone else, but that she be the person who influences the child. And when she has her own, she wants that child to be the inheritor of the people.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think it's more than that, because she says not that, you will have a child. When she suggests that he take Hagar, she says, I will have a child, right? So I think she may be less concerned with God, the fulfillment of God's promise, and more concerned in some ways with her own status. There was nothing
Rabbi?
worse. Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I always thought that at this point, whoever is writing down the story knows that Sarah is about to do something or was going to do something really awful. So he had to give, and I'm assuming it was a he had to give her a reason that was almost unimpeachable to do the horrible thing that she was about to do, cast a woman and her young child out into the desert. So he made it a focus on the posterity. No longer is she saying it's going to come through me. Now she's talking about, you know, you've been promised, the people have been promised a future. So that's a good enough reason, a better reason than that it's not my son.
Mhm.
Or so.
And just to take that one step further, God is with her on this, right? God says, listen to Sarah and do what she tells you to do, right? But I do think there's an element here, and that is that the worst thing that can happen to you in ancient times is not to have children, because your whole status really is defined as a mother. I'm going to come back to that again a little bit later, because we're going to see a very different picture of what it means to be a mother. But here, I think the first thing we learn about Sarah, the first thing she talks about is her desire for a child. And we knew from the beginning, the first time she was introduced, Sarah, she is barren, right? And so part of what defines her here as a character is this idea of childlessness and her desire for a child, and then that child be her child, her physical child. Not enough that it is in some sense symbolically her child through this handmaiden's tale, you should forgive me, but actually her child. We're going to move on now to, I'm going to give you back my screen. If you hold for a second, and here. Okay, we're going to move on to now the next, which is really a group of women. These are the daughters of Slovak. We're now in the book of Numbers. The people are wandering in the wilderness, and they're going to come to Moses with a claim. Before we do that, I want to look at another passage which may be familiar to you, and this is about a different claim and a different challenge to Moses. This is the challenge which is made by Korach, son of Ishar, son of Kahat, son of Levi. Korach is the great challenge to Moses's leadership and authority. If you saw the movie, the DeMille film about the Exodus, in that film, he's called Dathan. Dayton is a character here. You can see in this next line, he betook himself with Dayton and Aviram, right? I have a theory as to why DeMille chose Dayton as the spokesman rather than Korach. I think Korach is hard to say. Dathan is very easy to say. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I think. Anyway, Korach, with these characters in verse 2, got together to rise up against Moses, together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community, chosen in assembly, men of repute. They combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far, for the whole community, that is the community of Israel, is holy, all of them, and God is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourself up above the Lord's congregation?" Korach says that Moses and Aaron have taken this authority on themselves. They're arrogant. They put themselves over the people. And as you may know, this rebellion is ultimately unsuccessful. The earth swallows up Korach and his followers, and then there's a plague. Doesn't go well at all. So I want you to keep that scene in mind as we consider now the daughters of Slovak. And we're told about them this. The daughters of Slovak of the Menacite family, son of Heper, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh ben Joseph, came forward. The names of the daughters were Machla, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Sirza. They stood before Moses, Eleazar, the priests, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and they said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction, Korach's faction, which banded together against the Lord, but died for his own sin," right? Because everybody in the wilderness is going to die off. The new generation, the generation of the daughters of Slovak, are the generation that will go into the land. So he wasn't one of Korach's followers. He left no sons. Let not our father's name be lost to his clan just because he had no son. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen. Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord said to Moses, "The plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen. Transfer their father's share to them." And I want to emphasize the Hebrew, which doesn't quite make it in the translation here. What God says to Moses is, "Kain dibrot benot Zelophehad." The daughters of Zelophehad have spoken correctly. So bear that in mind as well. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. Where are we? Oh, come on, stop share. There we are. Okay, so we have not one woman, but a collection, but they seem to speak in one voice. They're sisters, and they're together on this. They're asking for inheritance, that which apparently only goes to sons. But here they make a case that they should receive it. And they make this case in terms really of their father, that their father's inheritance should not disappear. Okay, so what about this appeal that they make? What do you think about it? Why do they do it in the way that they do? Why are they not like Korach? What's the difference? And by the way, as I said earlier, according to Robert Walter, the first thing that we know about a person, or in this case, a group of sisters, is what defines them. It tells us who they are, what they're about. So what do you think about this claim? What, in terms of how they make it, what they say, their voices, in effect. Any thoughts? Anybody at all? Lisa, if you want to, then
Yes. They were sweet and well-behaved. They did not attack and say, "You and your horrible laws are the ones that make it impossible for women to inherit." They merely presented the situation and asked. I should just say, as a sidebar, Rabbi, when
Yeah.
I think of the years, millions, thousands of years of laws saying that women could not inherit because of what the Bible says, how interestingly it is that they leave out this little incident. But okay,
Yeah.
that's it. They
No.
were nice.
I would not call them radical feminists,
No.
right? Right. It's in the form of a question. It's very respectful, as you say. And part of, I think, the message here is that, they spoke properly, right? Particularly in a time frame in which Moses' authority is constantly being challenged. They want to make it clear they're not doing that. On the other hand, they're making an argument based on principle, right? It's not right. This isn't right. I thought somebody had, yeah, go ahead.
Carrie.
I think it's ironic that we're matriarchal and that we determine, who's a Jew and who's not a Jew through the woman, and yet the story is that everything goes to the man. So it kind of doesn't jive.
Okay, I would just suggest a thought to you, and that's this. If you think about Jewish identity, in some ways it's a mixture of the father and the mother, right? The father determines the tribe. You're Kohen, Levi or Yisrael because of your father, and whether you're a Jew or not comes through your mother. However, it's also worth noting that at this period, the biblical period, it's all about the father. Your identity is a result of who your father is rather than who your mother is. And we see lots of examples of Joseph, for example, who marries an Egyptian woman. And so,
When did that change?
so there are various theories about when it changes, but certainly it is relatively late. Throughout the biblical period, we don't see it. Some people associate it with the Greco-Roman world, but more than that, I don't really know. But it changes quite late. Any other comments or questions? So, Benot Slovak. One of the other things that I want to mention about this is not inconsequential, right? Because you can imagine, the cousins who expected this land to come to them, right? I mean, if the daughters can't inherit, it's going to move on to the brothers' sons. So it's not inconsequential, and that's perhaps why Moses goes right to God. Moses is not going to answer this question. This is a very fraught question. And there will be a pushback from the other tribes later on. But here at least, we see a model of how to speak. And yet, I think we see a willingness to press against the culture, right, to assert a claim. We're going to move on now to a radically different kind of woman. So let me share my screen with you. And here we are. Okay, and now Deborah Devorah. And Devorah, as you may know, takes up 2 chapters in the book of Judges, the 4th and 5th chapter. The 4th is a narrative and the 5th is a long poem that she speaks. A word about the period of Judges. The period of Judges is a period that begins after the Jewish people, the Israelites, come into the land of Israel. They've come after 40 years in the wilderness. They come in under Joshua. They don't yet have a king. That won't take place until we have a series of leaders who are known as judges, predominantly military leaders. They're called judges, but they're really not, it's not quite accurate. Although one of the roles of the judge, of the leader, is to serve as a judge. The sort of the framework of the book of Judges is that there are challenges against the Israelite people. A judge arises, the challenge is fought back, the land it goes to peace for about 20 years, and then it happens again and again. The judges do not unite all the tribes of Israel. They generally are summoned by some amount of them, some number of them, and get the job done. And now we come to Deborah, very different kind of a woman. Think about the daughters of Slovak and how respectful they are and how deferential. The Israelites cried out to the Lord for he, and the he here is Sisera, who is a foreign leader who is oppressing the Jewish people. He had 900 iron chariots, and he oppressed Israel ruthlessly for 20 years. Deborah, the wife of Lapidot, was a prophetess. She led Israel at that time. We don't hear a lot about women prophets. We're told, though, that Miriam was a prophet, though we don't know much about her in that role. Here, we're told that Deborah was a prophet. She used to sit under the palm of Devorah, right? This palm tree between Ramah and Beit El in the hill country of Ephraim. And Israelites would come to her for decisions. So she is a judge. She speaks in God's name. She summoned Barak, son of Avinoam of Kadesh in Naphtali, and she said to him, "The Lord God of Israel has commanded, go march up to Mount Tabor, take with you 10,000 men from Naphtali and Zvulun, and I will draw Sisera, Yavin's army commander, with his chariots and his troops towards you in Wadi Kishon, and I will deliver them into your hands." Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I will go. If not, I will not go." Very striking. He won't go unless she goes with him. This brave general. "Very well, I will go with you," she answered. "However, there will be no glory for you in the course you are taking, for the Lord will deliver Sisera in the hands of a woman." So she went with Barak to Kadesh. And as the story goes on in Judges 4, they are indeed victorious. And it is a woman named Yael who is able to, through her own guile, to kill Sisera and win the war. Now we come to Judges 5, and I've just got some snippets of this poem. "Deliverance had ceased in Israel, till I arose, Deborah arose, mother in Israel." Notice that she calls herself a mother. "Awake, awake, O Deborah, awake, awake, strike the chant. Arise, O Barak, take your captives, O son of Avinoam. Then was the remnant made victor over the mighty. The Lord's people won my victory over the warriors. From Ephraim came those whose roots were in Amalek. After you, your kin Benjamin from Machir came down. Leaders from Zvulun, such as hold the marshal staff. And Issachar's chiefs were with Devorah. As Barak, so was Issachar, rushing after him the valley." And now she changes her tune. "Among the clans of Reuven were great decisions of heart. Why did you stay among the sheepfolds and listen as they piped for the flocks? Among the clans of Reuven were great searchings of heart. Gilead tarried beyond the Jordan. And Dan, why did he linger by the ships? Asher remained at the seacoast and tarried at his landings." Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and we are back. Okay, Deborah, very different. Very, very different. In a role in which this is not, remember Sarah, who was desperate to be a mother in Israel. And now we have Deborah, until I arose, Deborah, a mother in Israel. What's the difference? What does mother mean to Deborah? Thoughts? Yeah, Marilyn. Hold down the space bar. Go ahead.
The mother of Israel.
The mother of the people.
Right.
Yeah. Somehow she makes me think of Golda Meir in some ways, right? A tough woman, a very tough woman. Mother of Israel. What else do you notice about Deborah here? Any other observations? Myra. Hold the space bar.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I'm so busy, I'm asking. Oh my goodness. I was going to say something. I'm sorry, I forgot.
That's
what I
okay.
wanted to
It's all right.
say.
If you reserve the right to come back. Okay. Any other thoughts about Deborah? Right. It's not a voice that we typically associate with Jewish women. She's a militant, right? She's powerful leader, and I'm so struck. There is a kind of feminist undertone here, much more explicit than we see with the Daughters of Slovak, right? she calls herself a mother, right? But remember what Barak said to her. If you don't go, I won't go. Right? This powerful, this general. If you don't go, I won't go. Myra.
She was willing to give Barak the covet, you can get the big thing, you can get it, where I won't do that. She was willing
Well,
to give
on
him.
the one hand, she is, but remember that she says, you'll get no glory through this. Almost as if, okay, if without me, you're not going to go.
Well, that's the point I'm making. She's saying to him, you won't get any glory if I come along. Therefore, I shouldn't come along so you could have the glory. I don't want the glory.
Yeah, but he insists she's the more powerful figure. He's the general, right? But she holds the power here. I think I saw another hand. Maybe not. Okay. I think the other thing that we see with her, and then Harold, I'll take your comment. The other thing we see with her is her mocking the tribes who refuse to contribute. Oh, great searchings of heart, right? You stayed by the seashore, right? This kind of, I mean, it's very, very powerful personality. Harold.
I was just curious. It said, the first thing said she led Israel. In what capacity?
Well, okay. So she's not a general, right? Because she is a prophetess, but I think most of all, she's a charismatic figure that people will go to. People have accepted her authority. Now, she only leads some of the tribes, but she is a full and complete leader who is recognized as such by the people. That's about as much as we can intuit from what little we have about her here. Any other questions? Okay, yeah, Barbara.
Well, as you know, they have the Haftorah Song of Deborah, which is read the same time that the Song of Sea is read. So, what of course. And even in the summer, I have this tree and it's very low. And when I go outside, I say to myself, this is like the palm tree of Deborah.
So you can sit under it and dispense wise advice. Very nice.
Everyone's gonna come up to me to ask me for advice, but.
All right, good. All right, so now with all this behind us, we're going to turn to the main event, which is our consideration of the person who we think about this week, perhaps most of all, which is Esther. And I will share my screen with you again. And here we go. And okay, so, and the story I think is well known. So I've just got snippets of it for you. When the king's order and edict was proclaimed, when many girls were assembled in the fortress of Shushan under the supervision of Haggai, Esther too was taken into the king's palace under the supervision of Haggai, guardian of the women. And remember that what the king has asked, he has commanded that all of the virgins in the kingdom be brought to him, and he will sleep with them, and he'll decide which of them will win his favor and will become queen. So the girl, that is Esther, pleased him, won his favor. He hastened to furnish her with cosmetics. This is Haggai, the guardian of the women. He was pleased by Esther. She won his favor. He hastened to furnish her with cosmetics and her rations, as well as the 7 maids who were her due from the king's palace. He treated her and her maids with special kindness in the harem. Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had told her not to reveal it. And then a little bit later, a few verses later, he gathers up another round of virgins. Esther is still there. The virgins were assembled a second time. Mordecai sat in the palace gate. Esther did not reveal her kindred or her people as Mordecai had instructed her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai's bidding as she had done when she was under his tutelage. So here we have an example of not only don't we hear her speak, but it's very clear there's a reason. And the reason is that she is obedient and she's not allowed to speak, right? She's been silenced, lest she reveal who she is. Moving along now to chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that has happened, that is with Haman and how a decree has been now set against the people of Israel and how they are going to be murdered, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. He went through the city crying loudly and bitterly until he came to the palace gate, the front of the palace gate. No one could enter the palace wearing sackcloth, right? A sign of mourning. Also in every province in the king's command, the decree reached there. There was great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, wailing, sackcloth and ashes. Esther's maidens and eunuchs come and inform her, and she was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordecai to wear that he may take off his sackcloth, but he refused. So here she is, she's the queen in the palace, and Mordecai is out there. Mordecai, who said that she should not reveal her identity, is now firmly revealing his identity as a Jew in mourning because what will beset his people. And she doesn't like it. She doesn't want him to be doing that. So she sends a reply to Mordecai saying, all the king's courtiers and the people of the king's province know that if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence without having been summoned, there's one law for him, that he be put to death. I don't know why this is turned blue, but ignore it. Only if the king extends the golden scepter, he may live. I haven't been summoned. So Mordecai has asked her to go into the king to make the case, and she says, I can't. He was told what she said. Mordecai had this message delivered to her. Do not imagine that you of all the Jews will escape with your life. On the contrary, if you keep silent, right, if you don't speak in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained this position, the royal position, just for this crisis. Esther sends back an answer to Mordecai, and now she speaks. This is the first time that she speaks. Go assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, day or night. I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I will go to the king, though it is contrary to the Lord. And if I perish, I will perish. So Mordecai went about the city and did just as Esther had commanded him. And I want to emphasize the word commanded. Remember that Esther was commanded by Mordecai not to reveal that she was a Jew. And here now, she is commanding him, and here she is spoken. All right, and now we are in the palace. Esther is gone before the king. He, at a risk of her life, and he lets her in and he says, what troubles you? What's your request? Even to half the kingdom, it will be granted. And she says, if it please your majesty, let your majesty and Haman come today to the feast that I have prepared for him. And the king commanded, tell Haman to hurry and do Esther's bidding. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. At the wine feast, the king asked her, what is your wish? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Even half the kingdom. And she says, my wish, my request, if your majesty will do me the favor, if it please your majesty to grant my wish and accede my request, let your majesty and Haman come to the feast which I will prepare for them. Tomorrow, I will do your majesty's bidding. So it's a big buildup, right? She goes in, she risks her life, She puts it on the line. The king says, what do you want? She says, we'll have a party. Come. And then at the party, this is her moment. She's going to tell him. What does she say? Come back tomorrow. We'll do it tomorrow. And now, so the king and Haman came to a feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, the king asked Esther at the wine feast, what's your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted. What is your request? Even half the kingdom. And she says, if your majesty will do me the favor, and if it please your majesty, let my life be granted me as my wish and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, massacred, and exterminated. Had we only been sold as slaves, as bondmen and bondwomen, I would have kept silent. For the adversary is not worthy of the king's trouble. Thereupon King Ahasuerus demanded of Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he that dared this? And the adversary and enemy, replied Esther, is this evil Haman? Haman cringed in terror before the king and queen, and the king in his fury left the wine feast for the palace garden, while Haman remained to plead with Esther for his life. He saw that the king had resolved to destroy him. King returns. Haman is lying there on the couch. Does he mean, said the king, to ravish the queen in my own palace? It looks very compromising. No sooner did these words leave the king's lips than Haman's face was covered. And we know the rest of the story. Esther spoke to the king, falling at his feet, weeping and beseeching him to avert the evil plot of Haman. Haman is already gone, but the plot, right? The king had sent out letters. The Jews are to be exterminated. So he extends the golden scepter. She arises. If it please your majesty, if I've won your favor, the proposal seems right to you. If I am pleasing to you, let dispatches be written to countermand those which were written by Haman, embodying his plot to annihilate the Jews throughout the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see the disaster which will befall my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred? And the king said, I have given Haman's property to Esther. He has been impaled on the stake for scheming against the Jews, and you may further write with regard to the Jews as you see fit. Write it in the king's name, seal it with the king's signet. For an edict that has been written in the king's name may not be revoked. And so she writes a letter of Purim for the purpose of confirming with full, this is the very end of the book. After it's all done, after they are saved, Queen Esther writes a second letter for the purpose of confirming with full authority the aforementioned one of Mordecai the Jew. He had first sent a letter, but this is the confirmation with authority. Dispatches are sent to all the Jews, and that these days of Purim shall be observed at their proper time, as Mordecai the Jew and now Queen Esther has obligated them to do. And the last thing that we learn is that Esther's ordinance validating these observances was recorded in a scroll. Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther. Okay, so some snippets from the story of Esther. And again, we're thinking about voice and Esther gaining her voice now. We saw her silence that was imposed upon her, at least with respect to revealing who she is. We saw her begin to speak and actually to give orders. And we saw at the very end, we saw that it is her order that is confirmed. And it is because of her order that we will celebrate Purim this week. So one of the puzzles here is, why is it that Esther invites the king and Haman not to one feast, but to two? She invites him. She's ready. The moment is there. Whatever you want, up to half the kingdom, I'll give it to you. She says, well, what I want is come back tomorrow. And it's only at the second feast. that she reveals this story. Why do you think that is? Yeah, Walter. Hold your finger on the space bar. Walter, hold your finger on the space bar. You're muted. Push down the space bar. Ah, go ahead.
Okay, so maybe she didn't really trust her husband because she knows he's very capricious, and she needed that second time to confirm to herself that he would really do what he said he would do. Because his character in this Megillah is very unreliable. He's very temperamental. You know, he goes from one end to the other end. He's not a consistent character, not a thoughtful man. He seems to be very, you know, capricious. I'll do it. No, I won't do it. So she gets this second time to, in some way, solidify his attention that he will do what he says he will do, and give her, you know, if she wants, half the kingdom.
Very nice. Other thoughts? Why does she need two meetings to do this?
But it
Yeah.
also be, Rabbi, that at the second meeting, there are many more high officials or something. It's a higher caliber meeting. The first one was a very big gathering, right? And this one may have been with some of the high lords or something, you know, really that they're all seeing what's going on and hearing.
I'm not sure that I see that distinction in the text. It's possible, but I'm not sure I see it. Go ahead.
I thought to get up her courage and to set the stage properly so that she would be able to do that in a manner that would present it well.
Yeah, so there is a sense in which she is finding her voice here, right? She needs that courage. And I think I almost see her stammering the first time. What is my request? Come back tomorrow. I want you to come to a party, right? I think this is a story about a woman who finds her voice and in the process becomes a powerful leader. She's not like Deborah, right? But Deborah doesn't have to deal with this kind of court, with this enormously powerful man. And that, for me, this is really emblematic of the move from silence to speech and to speech with authority. But I also want you to notice something else, and that is the way she talks to the king, and particularly the very odd argument that she makes. Well, you know, my people is going to be destroyed. And if we were only going to be made slaves, I wouldn't have even bothered you with this. This is not worthy of your notice, right? What do you make of that sort of rhetorical move that she makes in speaking to the king? Any thoughts about that? I'm reminded a little bit of the Daughters of Slovak too, right? That she knows she's playing her audience. She knows how to speak, how to make, you know, here's a woman who didn't speak at all. Then she kind of stammers, and maybe I'm reading more into this than is there. I acknowledge it. But here now she's quite eloquent. And she, you know, she's also kind of flattering him in a way. I wouldn't impose on you, right? And I would go back what Walter said too. You know, there is this question of his being capricious. Up to half my kingdom? Did he really mean that? Right? I mean, you know, anyway, any final comments that anyone wants to share before we wrap up? Questions or comments? Anybody at all? Well, so I hope you found this interesting and meaningful. I want to leave you with just a couple of thoughts. One is this idea of Robert Alter's, that the first time a person speaks tells you who they are. try to bear that in mind as you continue to study Torah. And if you look at characters in the Bible and see what it suggests, because I think it's really interesting. Second thought I would give you is that we often have this image of the Bible as being very patriarchal. It is, right? Men call the shots. And yet, I'm reminded, you may have seen that film, which I love, My Big Fat Greek Wedding. If you've seen that film, there's this wonderful scene in which the daughter who wants to go to college and her father is opposed to it. And her mother says, don't worry, you'll go to college. And she says, but daddy won't let me. And he's the head of the house. And she says to her daughter, yes, the man is the head of the house, but the woman is the neck. And wherever she points, that's where he goes, right? I think you see that in some of these biblical stories. You see women being very decisive. Sarah, she calls it when it comes, she says, take Hagar into your bed. And then she says, send Hagar away. He's the patriarch. He's the one who says, go, and they go, right? Still, I think you see women whose voices are heard. If it wasn't for the daughters of Slovak, inheritance would have been very different. Right? If it wasn't for Deborah, Barak never would have gone to fight, and the oppression would have continued for another 20 years. And Esther saves the Jewish people as she finds her voice. So I think this idea that it's a patriarchal society is much more complex than we often think about it being. And on that note, I want to thank you all for listening and wish you Ziesen Freilach, very happy Purim, as we all will struggle to find ways to celebrate this year. And God willing, by next year, and hopefully sooner, things will be back to normal.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
Rabbi, on
Thank you,
behalf
Rabbi.
of the Hershey community, let me say it was a pleasure to hear you speak again. And I ask all of you, if you enjoyed the talk today, next week on Wednesday, not on Monday, but on Wednesday, we're going to have Juliana Portnoy-Schlesinger speak on her work as an anthropologist. The week after that, our Chazan will be speaking about chanting and mindful meditation. And the week after that will be a representative from AIPAC on the future of U.S.-Israeli relationship. And the week after that will be Sandy Feit speaking on whatever Sandy Feit wants to speak about. And anyone who knows Sandy understands what I'm saying.